grassroots volunteers in New York City stood up and protested the Defense of Marriage Act and the denial of same-sex marriage rights. And who would have thought that 20 years later, a small group of people would have created a movement across the country for marriage equality of 40,000 people that is now Marriage Equality USA. It truly is the epitome of that saying, what a small group of people can do and the impact that they can have. We were talking a little bit about wanting to know a little bit about marriage equality and our accomplishments. And we don't have big PR machines at Marriage Equality. I'm the first paid executive director, and I worked as a volunteer for a few years in that position even before. I was so fortunate to do that. But I'm really proud of what this organization has done. In 1999, when we were still just Marriage Equality New York, we created the first public education workshop called Marriage Equality 101 to start teaching about why marriage matters. In 2000, we were one of the first organizations, if not the first, to start staging Valentine's Day actions at county clerk's offices in California and across the country, demanding that they issue us marriage licenses and recognize our families. That would later grow into the same types of protests on tax day at post offices, explaining to people when they brought their tax papers in why marriage was important. In 2003, Marriage Equality USA created the first public marriage declaration for public officials to sign, affirming their support publicly for the freedom to marry. In 2004, all across California, we engaged in the Get Engaged tours, where people came out in their communities to talk about why marriage matters. And not just places like San Francisco and Los Angeles, but places like Eureka and Redding and Fresno and Sacramento and Bakersfield and Kern and San Luis Obispo, and all of the places that are harder to come out and talk about who we are because of the communities that we live in. In 2004, we began the Bridge Walks in New York City across the Brooklyn Bridge, which then grew into the Golden Gate Bridge and bridges in Buffalo and in other cities, to talk about bridging the gap between equality and justice. In 2004, a group of advocates in San Francisco hopped on a bus and drove across country, stopping in small towns all across this nation, where they had rallies and public education events to talk about marriage. The first time many of these places in Wyoming and Kansas and Iowa and Nebraska had ever had anybody come and talk about the importance of marriage. It was an absolute validation of the fact that our community is not just East Coast and West Coast, but it is all 50 states and everything in between, and we live in every community in every single state. In 2007, our advocates in New York created the Walk a Mile in Our Shoes program. They collected thousands of pairs of shoes from couples and families who were same-sex and delivered them to legislators in Albany, New York, each pair of shoes with a story from that family of why marriage mattered to them and their children. Those shoes were eventually strung all along the walkways of the Capitol, so every legislator walking in to do their job was reminded to do your job and to pass marriage equality. We created one of the first online legal and policy resource centers tracking marriage equality legislation in 2011. And in 2012, we were the first organization to create the Elections Project to track where every presidential candidate of every major party stood on the issue of not just same-sex marriage, but many different LGBT equality issues. And every single one of these things that I just talked about was done by volunteers. Every single one of them. And that is the backbone of our grassroots movement. Thank you. Yes, thank you. And I know many of you were involved in lots of those things. So I want to talk about Fresno for just a minute, because on the way here, again, I had somebody half-jokingly on Facebook say, "So why are you going to Fresno? Is that like the hotbed of gay rights?" And I said, "You're damn right it is." This is the community, and these are the communities where the work happens and needs to happen and is so often overlooked. And for me, it was so important that we continue to support and encourage and do work in communities like Fresno and Bakersfield and Sacramento and other places that are not part of blue California, or Rochester and Buffalo that are not part of blue New York State. because that is where the work needs to be done. And so often, many of our partner organizations overlook these parts of their communities. And that's not okay. And we're not going to change anything if we keep doing that. So that was really, really important that we continue to do that. I was so appreciative that Jamie and Jason continue to do that and continue to let me come in to be a part of it and to say yes, hopefully, every time they ask for resources and support. So I want to talk a little bit about what's next for the movement and what's next for marriage equality, and then I want to answer any questions you might have and then let you all continue with enjoying your night. And unfortunately after that I will have to drive back 3 hours because I have a 6 a.m. flight out of Los Angeles tomorrow morning. Our movement is moving into an intersectional framework. And what that means is as we continue to pass legislation around non-discrimination, around marriage, things that have been traditionally seen as just LGBTQ issues, we're starting to recognize and realize things that many of our partners and folks in our community have always known, is that we're not just who we sleep with and who we marry. We are also people of color who are suffering under a criminal justice system that is unfair. We are also undocumented LGBTQ people who suffer under an immigration system that puts transgender people of color into facilities, denying them access to legal representation and medical support. We are the highest population of homeless in this country. We are people who are denied access to our voting rights because of being people of color or living in rural communities or having access or lack of access to good education. We are more than just who we sleep with. We are more than just who we marry. And that intersectional way of looking at our movement going forward and new allies and advocates that we can work with, that we should be working with, that have stood by us in marriage, it's time for us to continue to reach out and expand our knowledge about being allies to them and their movements, and not just looking at them as their movements, but their movements are our movements. We are also lesbian women who lack access to reproductive justice and reproductive health care. We are undocumented and lack access to good legal counsel and an immigration system that supports keeping families together. Those are our issues, and I hope we continue to look at it that way. And the second thing that I think our movement is moving towards, and it's something I've tried to adopt and I try to share wherever I go and speak, is it's no longer good enough to be an ally. It's no longer good enough to be an ally. In fact, we must now become accomplices in the movement. And the difference between an ally and an accomplice is an ally shows up and says, you go first, and I will help you with your work. But an accomplice shows up and says, let's both go together, because I have my own work to do as part of being a part of this movement. So I really challenge folks to think about that when we show up to places. It's not just about supporting other people, it's about our own work to do. And I look at this really strongly, especially in the racial justice movement. It's not just about supporting our friends who are people of color. I, as a white person, need to be speaking out to other friends and colleagues of mine who are white about why racial justice issues matter. I need to be speaking out about why reproductive justice matters, about why immigration issues matter. I have my own work to do, not just showing up to help out. So where does that leave Marriage Equality USA? So we're celebrating 20 years. We're celebrating 20 years! That's amazing. It's amazing for any organization. We're going to be writing a book, and I invite all of you to get involved when we start announcing that process. We're going to be collecting stories, 500 to 25-word stories about one moment in your work with marriage equality that made a difference, and creating a living archive of the grassroots movement. The big guys have told their stories, and those stories are important. But our stories are just as important. And oftentimes before the big guys showed up, it's the people in this room that were keeping the movement going, and we can't forget that. We're also going to be donating all of our materials to the One Archive at USC, which is the largest LGBT archive in the world. And it is really important to me because that archive has 37 hours of public access every single week. So you don't just have to be a researcher, you can just show up and go and see your face reflected in this archive every time you go down there once the archives are set up. After we're done with our anniversary celebration in early May, we are going to be closing our doors. We were a single-issue organization and our mission was accomplished. but our vision of a country where people are treated equally was not. And so we are going to be putting our projects and programs out into other organizations to continue the work towards full equality and justice. And one of the ones that I want to announce today, even before we've announced it publicly tomorrow, is our National Equality Action Team, which is our project that has made over 100,000 phone calls and winning 15 different marriage campaigns since 2012. That program is going to be housed at Freedom for All Americans, the new national campaign to win non-discrimination protections in all 50 states at the federal level. We've so far been involved in the Houston campaign. We're calling in Massachusetts and Florida already, and we anticipate starting in Georgia, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Arizona in the first quarter of this year. And you can be involved in that from the comfort of your own couch, and that's exactly the way it's designed. So as that information comes out, I encourage you to take a look, and I hope that you'll continue to be involved. And even if you decide not to get involved with that, I hope that you stay involved with something. I hope you stay involved with your local political committees. I hope you stay involved with Get Equal. I hope you stay involved with the local LGBT center. I hope you stay involved with PFLAG. I hope you stay involved with something that makes you want to go and do something good for our community. Because it doesn't matter where you're doing the work, what matters is you're doing the work. And that's how we got to be 20 years old today. And that's how I've got to come here and stand up in front of you